Evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first breakout session in March meeting 2021. So I would like to briefly present the speakers today. We have Murtaza Vali, who is a critic, curator, and art historian. We have Otobong Nkanga, who is a visual and performance artist, who examines the social and topographical relationship with our everyday environment. We also have Qudsia Rahim, who is the director of Lahore Biennale and the co-founder and executive director of the Lahore Biennale Foundation. So Otobong, I would like to start the discussion with you. We just heard you speak on the previous session, speak about your work at Sharjah Biennial, site-specific work, and which is now part of the Sharjah Foundation collection, permanent installation of Beit al-Aboudi. And you spoke about how you related the artwork to the local context by using the rain song. And we'd love to hear you speak more about this, and specifically about how you've engaged with the community in this work.
Hello, thank you so much for having me here. And it's really an honor and a pleasure to be here. Yes, I mean, with the work Age in Ruins, only to recall the heart chisel from the past, was conceived through, of course, discussions with Omar Khalif, with also the different places that had visited also in the Emirates, looking at wells, looking at also the sea and understanding how that becomes underwater, how that becomes a very important part of the Emirates itself, and also thinking about salination, thinking about the salt, kind of fragmenting more or less the materials that actually allow for the plants to be green, but also at the same time that sips into the silent sip, the thing that changes the landscape without you seeing it, the invisible material, the salt. And when I was invited to do this project, I thought it would be interesting to also work with a fellow artist, and I invited Emeka Obo to be to collaborate with me. And so we were talking, and he was thinking a lot about this notion of the rain, the water also. And when he visited, he was interested in also bringing together with the kind of sound work I was making, also the sound with the kids making, singing the rain song. And the idea of having the kids from the different schools from Sharjah to sing the song was something that was very crucial, because then as kids, even as Nigerian kids, I remember when Emeka and I were talking about it, he would say, you know, I remember we sang the same songs, Rain, Rain, Go Away, Never, Never Come Again. So we're wondering what kind of song would be sang in the Emirates around rain. And so this song was a crucial song that I think everybody resonated with it when they entered the space, that they're like, oh gosh, that was my childhood. So it brought people back to a place that they recognize, and also something they might have forgotten in their memories that they did or that they experienced. And so I think every kid, maybe in the Emirates, must have experienced that song. And so it made sense to bring that in relation to an idea of rebirth, begging for the rain to come back and heal the land.
Thank you. And speaking of bodies of water, I'd like to ask Murtaza, you've often written about bodies of water, specifically in Sharjah, and I know you're going to present your paper soon within the March meeting. So I want to ask you about the significance of bodies of water in Sharjah and your views about it.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for inviting me to participate in this. It's actually, it's helping allay some of my homesickness. It's been a year. I was in Sharjah last year around this time. I left on the 16th and I haven't been back since, which is the longest I've been away from home since I left it initially to go to college in 1990. So it's nice to at least feel like I'm back a little bit, if only my disembodied head. But I think the spirit and the collectivity of the Sharjah of Sharjah and the March meetings, I can still feel it. So I just want to thank everybody at SAF for including me. Yeah, in terms of my interest in water, when you grow up in these Gulf cities, there's so much of the discourse, or maybe the way in which it appears from the outside and it's presented to the outside, it ends up being about the land, about the desert. And my memories of growing up there are very closely tied to the sea. The beach was a regular space you went to get away from the heat. It was also very accessible, very available. It was open, it was free. It was actually often raw and dangerous. I've had family members who passed away on the Sharjah beaches as well, drowned. So the sea has always been part of my life in Sharjah, and I think it was the 2007 biennial. I forget which number it was. I think 8, which was called at one. I can't remember if it ended up being its final title, but at one point in time, it was called Between the Land and the Sea, and that really made me realize how these Gulf cities are actually not desert cities. They are as much sea cities. And then that also then made me kind of reflect on what sorts of connections does the sea allow for that maybe the prevailing histories are not acknowledging. And what that did was it opened up the Gulf to the world that my family hails from, and a lot of sites and horizons and geographies that lie beyond, which is the Indian Ocean. And yeah, so I keep returning to the sea again and again. And then in the paper that I'm going to present next week, I'm going to talk about 2 very, very influential works that for me crystallized some of these realizations, which until I saw the work or experienced the work were, I think, intuitive. I hadn't figured out how important they were, which are these works by Camp, which are about actually the Dow trade network across the Indian Ocean that links Sharjah and Dubai to Iran, to Pakistan, to Western India, and around the Arabian Peninsula, then down to East Africa as well. So yeah, for me, the sea has always been important. It's always been the space that I come back to. And we can speak about this a little bit later as well. The sea is also kind of like an unruly relation, the way like Edward Glissant and a lot of the scholars of the Caribbean and the Black Atlantic have spoken about. It is a relation that is disruptive. It disrupts kind of static cultural categories, because it's often associated with movement. It's also associated with trade and exchange, and these are all forms of relation that challenge hegemonic cultures, hegemonic languages, hegemonic constructions of belonging. And so that's another reason why I'm repeatedly drawn to the sea and the possibilities of the sea.
Thank you, Murtaza. I'd like to go to Qudsia. Qudsia, as the director of the Lahore Biennial, I'd like to hear your views on how you see biennials as platforms for engaging communities. Can you unmute?
Yes. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I think it's a very important thing that you brought the attention towards biennials, especially biennials of the South or biennials of the 3rd generation. I think they have, they don't, and especially like new format biennials, right? So for example, somebody like us who has just started to work in this field, I think we work with a sense of responsibility, with a sense of understanding our communities and the diversity and the challenges that come with it, especially for, biennials of the South. I noticed that most of us are conflict cities, or there are some layer of, because we've been, colonized for so many years because, there were invasions, migrations, and, with Afghanistan, a lot of migration from there happened over the years. We had Mughal Raj, and then Sikh and Hindu, and so there is a whole amalgamation of thinking and thought processes. And while some of them are very creative, and we see all kinds of, in different times, we see various skills, especially arts and crafts, kind of thriving. And then we also see how these can be point of conflict as well. So I think it is very important for new foundations of new arts organizations or people who are working in public to be mindful of these and to work with the understanding of our audience, of our public, of our communities, and somehow with an added layer of responsibility. I think it is very important to address them. Over the years, through the various couple of biennials that we do, I think that has always been on the forefront, whether it is a local community or communities that we are working with, or we talk about the larger conversation where regional conversations need to be created. And I think that also forms some kind of various layers of community and community building, because there are lots of similarities between the nations in the neighborhood and otherwise. So I think we do have a year-round calendar of activities beyond the biennial. So we have ways, and we've been employing ways to be in communication and do open calls and hear their response through that, or do town hall style meetings or art speak sessions where we constantly are in touch with our audiences and build programs based on some of these conversations that we have.
Thank you. I also wanted to ask about, in your opinion, what are the synergies between Sharjah and Lahore that made you decide to invite her to curate the past Lahore Biennale?
I've been watching you guys for a long time. That's the advantage of actually being in the space for a longer period of time than most of us who are aspiring biennials. I remember meeting Vali when we just initially remember Vali when we started. I was just coming to Sharjah and I was coming to Dubai, and we had all these conversations. I think that's the most beautiful thing about, I think, Sharjah is that neutral space, that place of conversations that it can, and it does work very actively. It's so easy to work and be in conversation, whether scholarly, academic, or just a one-to-one, heart-to-heart conversation with so many other countries in the region where otherwise, because of the border control or because of politics, because of other, it's so easy to make conflict with people, So at some point, your politics and your government says you're friendly with this nation. Another time they say, no, now we're in conflict with them. So I think these neutral spaces become nucleuses. And I think nucleuses of conversation, nucleuses of bringing conversations together, nucleuses of creative thinking, art production. And I think various forms of art production becomes very important because it goes through all kinds of boundaries and all kinds of, hiccups and, barricades of sorts. So I think Sharjah plays a very important role. And I think Sharjah understands that also, that it sits in the Minasa region. It is in conversation with the South Asia and larger area, with Africa and then with Europe in a close proximity. So I think it understands the importance that locations sometimes bring. And I think the programming through March meetings and otherwise all kinds of conversations are being generated here. And I think Hur was I think I'll be very frank about this. Like, you know, I remember one of the biennials, I'm not going to say who, they came to me and said, well, Qudsia, you could not have actually gotten a better curator. You know, she opened up the region in ways that were not open. Conversations through this biennial, we were able to have conversations in Pakistan, sitting in Lahore, that otherwise were completely unimaginable. You know, having these conversations with Iran, having these conversations in Afghanistan, having these conversations with the Gulf or Africa, having these conversations with South Asia, it opens up all of these regions in ways to us and us to them. And I think a lot of our art and artists are well established all over the world, but here we were able to see a lot of our artists for the first time, because we don't have a you know, a regular you know, international exhibitions, or a lot of investment in the arts is not available, or funding in the arts is not available. So I think what the result of this, I'm sorry, making the conversation long, but with the result of this, what happened was that it opened the eyes of the government, which is of course a very big player in you know, bringing art into the public space, and conversations through art or doing the biennial, to all kinds of possibilities and possibilities moving forward. So the ownership that the government and the various art entities and the region opening up, what it brought was a whole bunch of possible imaginable futures and conversations.
Thank you. Otobong, I would like to ask you, as an artist who's participated in more than one biennial, over the years, how have you noticed that the biennial has developed or changed?
Is this question for me?
For Otobong. I mean, if you'd like to answer, maybe we'll go back to you after Otobong.
That's okay.
Yeah, a lot had changed. I mean, I think I was privileged, I'm privileged to have been able to be there in 2005 and to be able to see how the landscape itself changed. And also to see the kind of works that are brought in and that are shown, the kind of transitions of different sizes of works, you know. I remember in the first one in 2005, we were mainly showing in the museum. So the space itself, you couldn't make big work, so you couldn't really work outside. And then when I was invited in 2013, the Sharjah Biennial with Yuko Hasegawa, we had works like Superflex, you know, really taking over a whole a part of the city and really changing it into a public space and where different families could meet and play during the time of the Biennale. And then also to see that there were new buildings, that the SAF, you know, the Sharjah Art Foundation was formed. And then you see that you have different courtyards that you can work in, which also shapes the kinds of works that are shown. So you'll see works coming from Brazil and dealing with the landscape itself, dealing with the sun, the light. You actually see works engaging with the atmosphere, the temperature, the working with mist, to plants, to, you know, you could actually see that it shifts from just the white cube, or let's say a space, into really entering into the spaces of reality and entering into the lives of the people that live there. And so that's what I think has happened over time, and how. And also as an artist, whenever I come to Sharjah, I know that I can really explore and dream and imagine. And I can make the work that allows me to touch on different aspects. And I know that it's not only just in Sharjah, main Sharjah, but now it's extended into other places like in Kalba factory, Al Queen. where there was in the last Sharjah, there was this big airplane and performances. I think what has really changed is that it's really stretched the medium, stretched the way of thinking, and we can do performances as you can really just write a poem. It allows you to explore and dream. And there are not many biennales in the world that allows you to do that. And I think that's what has happened from the time I saw in 2005 till now, 2019.
Thank you. Speaking of location and going back to Unji mentioned in her panel, Unji Ju, how curators and biennials are recharting history and recharting the future. So I'd like to redirect the question to Qudsia and to ask about the opportunities and the challenges around the biennials locations. So Murtaza, if you, can you answer the question, please? The locations of biennials and opportunities and challenges, and how the community, how the location allows the community to engage with the biennial.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I could take a stab until Qudsia comes back. I think what is important about the biennial format is specifically its capacity to locate with the to engage with its site and the community that that is related to that site. I mean, I don't know how many people can say this, but I actually, in reflecting on this March meeting and specifically the topic that Okwi brought to the table and will be the subject of his biennial. I've been reflecting a lot on the history of the Sharjah Biennial and on my history of viewing biennials, and I have the privilege of saying that I learned about biennials through Sharjah. I had never actually seen any other biennial until I saw the first two Sharjah biennials, and it was only then that I made a trip over the summer to go to Venice and see the Venice Biennale. And I'm thinking in retrospect, it's actually that's quite a privilege, and it's given me a really interesting perspective because it's made me really acutely aware of how a biennial can and should relate to its site, because the Sharjah Biennial, and it's it's a site that I know quite intimately and that I have a deep history with. So every engagement that is an engagement with the site or the city of Sharjah is something that becomes very aware to me. And since then, I've actually kind of taken that awareness, and I think I use it as a way of judging how successful biennials are in other parts of the world when I'm lucky enough to travel and get to see them. It's like how attuned are they in with what's going on within the cities that they're sited in. And in terms of the way in which the biennial has shifted, it's definitely shifted away from being kind of a museum based exhibition, which it kind of felt like when it was at the expo. Although even the expo, I kind of liked that as a site because it's such a Sharjah site. And it's spread out across the city and now across the emirate, and it's engaging significantly more with public space. So in terms of how the biennial has shifted over time, I think that's definitely one very clear way in which it has. It's definitely become more public.
Thank you. But see, I would like to ask you the same question about the location of the biennial and how, what are the challenges and opportunities that the location offers in Lahore? I think we're having a connection problem with Qudsia. So going back to you, Murtaza, as someone who has been living in Sharjah and been around for many biennials, same question I asked Otobong. How, over the years, how do you see has the Sharjah Biennial developed and changed?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite profound. Like I did not know about the biennial at all because I guess the first decade of the biennial I was abroad in the US in college. I actually first read about the Sharjah Biennial in a magazine, and I have a very vivid memory of encountering that review. And this was for the 2003 biennial, the first one that Sheikh Ahoud did along with Peter Lewis. And then I took it upon myself. I said, I had just started a PhD program. in 2002 in art history. And I took it upon myself to guarantee that I would not miss another biennial going forward. And so since 2005, I've been attending each one. I mean, the biennial has shifted. It's become more institutional in some sense as the foundation as its reputation has increased, and as the foundation has been established, and a kind of like programming through the rest of the year has been initiated and established as well. It used to feel a little more unruly at the very beginning. And it also used to feel a little more regional. It's become more global in its spread. I think there are advantages and disadvantages to both of those, both of those aspects. But it is now a landmark event. It is, like a lot of people have mentioned, it's one of the primary, if not the only biennial in the region, and it's well known internationally. The other thing that the Sharjah Biennial has done is within the art world. Now, when I tell people I'm from Sharjah, they know where I'm talking about. When I think back to 2003, most people had no clue. They by then had some idea of the United Arab Emirates and Dubai, but they still didn't know about Sharjah. And so the biennial has literally put Sharjah on the art world map for me and my art world community. But I'll let Qudsia respond.
Thank you. Go ahead, Qudsia. So the challenges and opportunities of locations and sites used during the biennial.
Okay, so I think this was very important for us, right? I think locations were very important. For lack of public spaces, for lack of a lot of infrastructure in the arts, Pakistan had already been facing all kinds of hiccups in those directions, whether they were state sanctioned restrictions or restrictive kind of mobility, or whether it was lack of institutions, right? And so we had this one institution called the National College of Arts, very well known. Most of our artists are from there, but it was there for that was the only resource to go to. It's quite in the recent past that we see Indus Valley School and Beacon House University have also come up and doing some really important work. So what did it mean? Lahore was the culture capital of the undivided India, right? And then we also see all kinds of movements and shifts and various literary movements, getting established here, getting birth here, and all kinds of conversations are happening. So it's a very bubbly city in that ways, and it's a very resilient city in that ways. But when we want to work with the arts, we also realized that there was a lot of work that needed to be done. And if we want to also engage in a responsible position, we needed to actually be where the people were and not invite the people into these purpose-built situations. So what we did a reversal of roles, because lack of institutions was already there. We don't have a place we operate from. So that opened up a very beautiful possibility of treating the city as a canvas. And then we went to shop. We would go to these locations, whether they were museums, whether they were Lahore Fort, or whether it was a park. So now everything was now a possibility and a location for intervention and a location for innovative ways of engaging with the publics. These are the places where there are a lot of people coming already. I think we had audience. And so now all we needed to do was, work with them through these locations. And these locations are very important because, like I said, our history is such that over the years we've had influences of various invasions and various people coming, immigrants and coming in and out. So we see there's a certain era buildings. We see all kinds of modern buildings also. The city is also sprawling a certain way, becoming bigger. by the minute. The population, more than 51% of the city population is under 25. So I think all these things were very easy. While the challenges were there, the challenges became a strength, and the locations became place of response. So for example, for the first biennial, we had a footfall, only the footfall of about 1.5 million people, right? And then for the second biennial, with the Hoors biennial, it would just skyrocketed, right? Because now we were engaging with billboards. Now we were engaging with public spaces like we were not experiencing before. We had also started using, who had a fantastical vision. I think here again, there's a beautiful alignment between Sharjah and Lahore. And that's the kind of thinking she brought into Lahore, where she was looking at these locations which were not part of public use and not part of regular circulation. So she would go into them, and we would clean them up, and we would restore them in a way, or we would bring them back into the conversation. So like the Lahore Planetarium was something, a building that was abandoned, nobody was using it. We cleaned it up, and we had one of the most spectacular show there. The Bradlow Hall was another such building. And now what happened was that people started to say that we were, I'm going to say this in Urdu first, why I say it in English, Lahoriyon ko Lahore dikha diya, which means that the Lahoris got to see the city of Lahore. And that actually engaged the city, the people, the communities in a way that was never engaged before. The result of this, we also see the government taking ownership, but the result of it, we see another way that now Lahore is one of the UNESCO city of literature, and all kinds of, all kinds of platforms like the New York Times and other places, they're now calling Lahore the city to go to in 2021, COVID permitting, travel permitting, but so it changes conversation, it changes perceptions, it changed a lot of perceptions that a lot of people had of the city. The ownership of the people, on grassroots level changed. We see that significantly. The ownership of the government changed, because now the government is invested in and enjoying these points of privilege and position that they didn't have before in the recent past. So I think the biennials can, and we often see, become a point of great progress and connectivity and forward momentum.
Thank you. Otobong, I'd love to also ask you the same question about the location and the sites of your work. How has it affected your work? How have you engaged your work? You've spoken about your work and the Sharjah Art Foundation sites, and there was a question from the audience about your work, Taste of Stone.
Yes, I think with regards to the Sharjah Biennial, what I enjoy the most is this courtyard that you can see in a lot of, it's also connected to my own African heritage of the architecture of the space. When you look at, for example, a Muslim architecture, and you have houses, and the courtyard has been always very much the central space for conversation, where the family meets and eats and talks and fights, and everything happens within that space, but also are protected. I think so far have worked a lot with the courtyards and looking at the courtyards within Sharjah. And I think that those spaces are offered, especially with the kinds of architecture that has been made in that space. So I mean, for example, with Taste of a Stone, it was important for me to think about what the stone has done, or the rocks or the mountains, and to extend it to a place like the Fujairah Mountains. And to think about what the Fujairah Mountains does, or what to even the granite that comes to make the roads of Sharjah. So the roads of Sharjah is actually part of the mountains. The mixing of gravel and tar and everything comes also from those elements coming from extensions of Sharjah itself. And when I was thinking of Taste of a Stone, it made sense to be able to try to talk about elements that are within the local spaces, but also to connect it to different parts of the world. And so the work Taste of a Stone was a way of exploring the different ways stones move from one place to another to build, the notion of construction, the notion of breaking down a mountain to create another surface, the thinking of all the skyscrapers that have been built over time are actually elements taken out from mountains. It's stones that have been grinded to make a structure. And I wanted a work which can connect with that locality and things that are external to that locality. So when I performed with the mango tree, or I perform with a papaya tree, or perform with a plant, a queen of the night, it allows for that kind of extension to the migration of plants, the migration of elements, the migration of people, labor. And within the performance, you can explore all these different things that are within that geography, but connected to, for example, the islands and what it means to be an island, or connected to Southeast Asia, connected to the Nigeria, my country, or connected to other parts of the continent, or to Brazil. And also listen to the stories within the spaces to be able to make a work that resonates with different kinds of people. So I think the space itself, what it offers, especially to an artist, I'm talking from an artist's perspective, is very important because it helps shape the work and also surprises us in things that we would never think the work can do. And I think when Qudsia talks about, you know, the planetarium and going in Lahore, and not only the local people, but even I bet the artists must have been amazed by what the legacies also of colonialism, because there are lots of these ruins that are in spaces, in the 70s, you know, tropical architectures to all kinds of things. And we have many ruins in spaces that we do not think about what they should be doing or what they could have been. And I think artists are able to reimagine those spaces and maybe give life another new possibility for the future.
Thank you. Also, another question I have for you as an artist: how do you feel that the audience that engages with a biennial and specifically with your work affect its meaning and its impact?
Okay, I have to think about that one.
Okay, maybe you can ask Murtaza from your perspective as a curator and as a critic. The same question: how do you feel that the engagement with the audience impacts the meaning of the biennial?
That's I'm a bit stumped by that one too. I think audience engagement is key, especially since the biennial, especially in the version in Sharjah, since it's free, and since it engages so much with the site, with the city as site. It is kind of a civic space, and so like audience engagement is critical. But I do think it's important that the curators not. I think it makes the most sense to engage with the audience through a dialogue rather than try to anticipate what you think an audience might want. And that's another thing that I've really appreciated with the biennial, is that it has often presented things to an audience that they may not have known that they needed to think about or talk about. I don't know if that goes anywhere to answering your question, but so I think audience is key, but I don't think you should be limited in how you conceive of the audience for the biennial, because the audience for the biennial is limitless. It could be someone who lives in a building that's like down the street from one of the Mureja spaces, or it could be a high-powered curator who happens to be flying through Dubai on their way somewhere else and decided to take a jaunt out and come see the biennial. And so, I don't know if that answers the question.
Okay, so Qudsia, I have another question from the audience. The relationship between the biennial and the development and rehabilitation of spaces, and this I think applies to both Lahore Biennial and Sharjah Biennial, and maybe we can go back to you, Murtaza, about this. And also Qudsia, by extension, how do you avoid getting co-opted into soft power strategies that might not align with the aims of the biennial?
The last thing, how do avoid what?
How do you avoid any government, cultural, or soft power strategies which may not align with the aims of the biennial?
Yes, yes. So, can I answer a little bit about the previous question, if you don't mind? I have a tiny observation. I just wanted to, thank you. I think, you know, so I think this is so new for me, and I'm kind of enjoying what I do. So I think one of my pastime is to actually just observe. So once we put the biennial out, I'm just sitting, watching people interact with the artworks, respond to them, and the kind of conversations that are having. So I think the number one thing that I took away from the work that we do is the multiple conversations that happen, the multiple narratives that happen. So for example, Amar Kanwar's, one of Amar Kanwar's works. So I'm just watching a mother and a daughter from not a very affluent background, but watching because they had come to the Lahore fort. And Amar Kanwar is talking about the partition of 1947 in his movie. And there's a scene of empty right? The daughter, mother said, like when father left and took everything with him and left our cupboards bare. Do you think something like that happened here? And these things are hair-raising. It was perhaps not what Amar Kanwar was thinking, but what other people take away from creating these connections, these very, very valuable connections. I think they're very important. And I think, so a lot of work that we did over the course of time, we realized all kinds of conversations that it builds, and it's kind of like really beautiful. Spaces rehabilitation, I think it's a very important thing for us. I think we've taken it on as a challenge as we move along, because the lack of public spaces is really difficult, very, very problematic. And lack of cultural institutions, lack of funding, those kind of things. We saw since when we worked on the second biennial Between the Sun and the Moon with Hoor, we brought into conversation this place called the Bradlow Hall. Now, Bradlow Hall is perhaps the most central building and conversation when it comes to post-colonial times, because Sir Charles Bradlaugh was the first person who actually stood up against his own people, saying we need to revisit our agenda, our thought process, and then there's a whole school of thinking behind his legacy, which is beautiful. So since we opened it up, and it's a really, really rundown building, we were afraid to go into it because we thought the structure might collapse. But you know, all kinds of studies were done. Our Khan Foundation Trust for Culture was very helpful to us at that time, and we realized that we can still use this place. And since then, now drumming circles are happening over there, you know, book readings are happening over there. So the place, just the whole idea of notion of repurposing, actually it came alive. And while we were in the process of fixing and cleaning, it was already one of the most sought after buildings. So I think this is a really important notion. I think it was really nice, and we do it very consciously. The life of what the space may take through various voices then are further brought into the mix. I think it's really beautiful to see where it goes. And we're very happy to be able to mobilize these things. Regarding the government and government involvement, I think it's imperative for us that the government is involved. So what I do is, because we have absolutely complete void of you know, critical and artistic thinking and practice in public space, right? So it's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because what I am able to do is bring a lot of examples of people like yourselves in the panel who's been doing and leaving this trail of really good work behind. I just collect them all, make them into a nice presentation, take them to the government, take them to the next person who I think will make sense. And I start sharing them. What happens is that the conversations that these artworks are making are far more important than the political trail that it's creating. While it is very important, and the governments can take a lot of pressure, I've noticed this also. So what I do is I keep showing them what good a biennial, supporting a biennial or arts organizations or artists can bring to a city, bring to the country. And these are conversations that I'm having with them all the time. When somebody visits, like a curator visits, or an artist visits from outside the country, I actually make it a point to invite everybody and say, meet this person, and this person is, they have these conversations. And what is the result of this is that the people in the various forms of government are getting they're getting familiar with arts, familiar with what kind of work is happening globally, how these biennials can help the city. 2 days ago, I went to the government. They had invited me to actually give me a small grant. They thought that we're doing really good work and we need to, which we all need a bit of support from the government. They gave us a small grant. So that we can continue the work, and the COVID times are not, we not close our doors, and we keep functioning and we keep working. So I think exposure to them, I found that keeping them close to you, those kind of things are very important. Have they ever interfered in my work? No, they don't. I'm not saying that these are a special breed of people. I'm just saying so far I have been very lucky that nobody's ever asked me what you're doing, the kind of work that I'm doing. But I do a lot of work for the government, right? In the sense that they were trying to celebrate Punjabi day, right? So I help them connect with all kinds of artists who are working in various forms of arts with the government, so that they can create a beautiful program. And when they're looking at all of this, when they're seeing all of this, they just feel that ownership, which is really nice. So in some capacity, I've shown some really, really important works, and I don't censor anything because a lot of our work is in public spaces. Clearly, artists want the audience to respond to the work, and what they want to show in the public space is totally on their discretion. And of course, they work with a curator to realize the work. And, we found that this method kind of works very well with the government.
Thank you, Qudsia. Going back to Murtaza, in your perspective, the relation between the Sharjah Biennial and the urban development of the city.
Yeah, it's kind of a tricky question to answer when you do have the sort of depth of historical knowledge that I do with the city of Sharjah and with the biennial as well, because often people who tend to visit biennials will be repeat visitors, but there might be a couple of editions break in between. So actually, I've noticed the shifts in the city of Sharjah alongside the shifts in the biennial quite clearly. And it's hard to tell whether the biennial is causing gentrification, which in certain parts of the city, or whether the biennial is revitalizing cities that were being, sites within the city that were falling into disrepair or being abandoned. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if the biennial is a tool of gentrification, if it causes gentrification, or if it is actually a tool that allows for development or preservation that's just part and parcel of the natural course of a city. But I do think that, you know, the preservation of some of these sites that have happened through the biennial and the Art Foundation are quite amazing. I mean, I always loved the Flying Saucer. It was actually a building I would use for people visiting from Dubai to give them directions to my house because it was such an iconic landmark and such an like complete architectural folly and it was impossible to miss. So I'm actually really glad that that building hasn't been torn down. So many other buildings of my youth from the 70s and the 80s and in Sharjah and Dubai had been torn down. And, you know, even the building in Kalba, it's such an amazing location, such an amazing site, and also just such an amazing structure that I'm actually quite happy that they're being preserved. There is something to be said about what happens as the building is brought up to code and made into a inhabitable space where events can happen, exhibitions can happen. You lose some of the kind of like dissonance that's there when it's used as a raw space when it's first rediscovered. It becomes a lot more domesticated or habitated or sanitized. It becomes a little closer to a white box. And so then, you know, the sorts of works that can be presented there and how they're read shifts a little bit. But I do think, you know, the fact that these structures are being preserved for posterity is quite amazing. As for co-optation, yeah, I don't know about that one. I've never been in a position where I've had to worry about anybody co-opting anything I've done. So I think I won't try to answer that.
As we have 5 minutes left in this conversation, I'd like to ask you first, Murtaza, in these discussions that we've been having for like so far, yesterday and today, is there anything that has struck with you or something that you would like to talk about, something that you think is relevant and need to discuss further?
Me?
Yes, please.
Yeah, you know, actually, I think you know, as with everything that Okwi did, he was so prescient in some ways. And the topic of his biennial and the topic of this March meetings are perfect in some sense. I for a while now have been thinking that kind of a history or a historiography of the biennial itself was long overdue. I mean, as someone who visits the biennial regularly and visits the city of Sharjah regularly and calls it home, for me, the city has now become a palimpsest of every biennial past. Like I see the ghosts of these projects that really touched me or moved me as I'm walking through the city or driving through the city or walking through, you know, the arts and heritage area near the creek. And so what's been really lovely is to see all of these people and whose work and whose practice and whose ideas and whose labor I have engaged with over these last like 15, 20 years, have them come back and then reflect on their times and their experiences working with the Sharjah Biennial. And you know, that'll continue as we move forward as well. So I'm quite excited about that.
Thank you. Also, Otobong, I'd like to ask you about your view as an artist on the importance of platforms like the March meeting to discuss the current and discuss the issues we've been discussing.
Yeah, I think the idea of having, I think discussions are very important to be able to expand further, just beyond the material or the exhibitions. And it can bring in voices that, you know, because we are in a medium that is not only just the making of the work, but they're curators, they're writers, they're filmmakers, they're fashion design, they're all kinds of people that are creating and are shaping the world. And I feel that to be able to have a place where all different kinds of voices from different mediums, different ways of thinking come in to discuss, to have a conversation, or even to contradict each other, or to even fight about an issue. I think that's very crucial to be able to build a possibility of understanding. And also to understand that we live in this world and we have different ways doing things, of thinking. And I think that place where the March meeting brings people together, enriches the mind, enriches the way of looking at the world, and also understanding the political, ecological, social complexities of multiple places. And I know that I've really, when I followed the March meetings, I learned a lot from artists' works, how they were thinking, the process of making, and also the complexities of dealing with things in their localities, that where they come from. And sometimes it helps to understand, let's say in the future, when you're invited to that same place, how that some things you already know, because the artist or the filmmaker or the thinker have emphasized and talked on it, but they also bring solutions to things that we don't necessarily think of. And I'm just thinking of, you know, when Okwi, with this new, with the Biennale coming up, and also thinking of Okwi's Biennale in all the world's future. And it just makes me think about all the different voices that came together in that exhibition, and to create a platform that gives voice to many voices that you wouldn't hear. And I think the March meeting does that too.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank speakers and audience for attending this breakout session. Qudsia Rahim is speaking on the 15th as part of a panel about Sharjah Biennials in a regional context. And Murtaza Vali is presenting a paper also around Biennial on the 19th. We look forward to your presentations, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.